Okay, great. Okay. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our Fortune 500 panel. We have two of the most popular AI companies right here, NVIDIA and Medius. Okay, why don't we start with a quick intro from the guest?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Nice to see all of you. Grace, thanks for putting this on. I work at NVIDIA on our VC Alliance team, which is our VC partnerships effort. A lot of people ask, how does NVIDIA work with startups? How does NVIDIA work with VCs? Why does it matter? Historically, a lot of NVIDIA's customers have been large tech companies, large companies in general. But in the last 3 to 5 years, the rate of billion-dollar companies coming out of startups is very much accelerating. And we used to say that the next biggest AI startup is part of it, or sorry, the next billion-dollar company is part of Inception. And now it's not even the next billion-dollar company, it's billion-dollar companies today. And so I work with VCs and startups to drive closer collaborations between NVIDIA and these up-and-coming companies.
Hi, my name is Andrei Leonov. I run GTM for Medius. And hopefully my prior career of over a decade in management consulting gives me a bit of a different perspective on the Fortune 500.
I think the first question I have for you guys is, how is Fortune 500 company actually leveraging AI?
I'm happy to start with that. Before working at NVIDIA, I had worked primarily at VC firms and startups, and so NVIDIA is by far the largest company I've been at. And it's my first exposure to Fortune 500 companies. And I think as much as you hear these large companies talking about the future of AI, the truth of it is, in the day-to-day, not much has changed between the way people are doing their work today and how they were doing it 5 years ago. There's, I think, a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, but in terms of changes in day-to-day work, day-to-day business model, strategy, I think a lot of the Fortune 500 companies have been a little bit paralyzed by the prospects of that change. I will say on the plus side, I have seen a lot of companies, partners of NVIDIA itself, that are exploring any and all new technology. And so it's a time of exploration and curiosity. It's a time where employees are to get on themselves to test out new tools and think about new ways to innovate. But it's too early, I think, to see overall business model shifts and strategy shifts. But hopefully we're seeing those changes in the coming years.
I would agree. In reality, Fortune 500 companies don't use AI today at scale, right? Actually, I think that the fact that this panel consists of so few people actually shows is for people to actually make an impact on Fortune 500. Yeah, I'm saying that, there are two of us, and there were like a dozen people talking about deep tech. But I would like to actually start by painting a higher level picture of how a properly sized impact from AI look like, right? I think Anna a couple of panels ago mentioned that the total investment into AI is roughly $1,000 for every person in the US. If you rebase it to white collar workers, it would be probably $4,000 per person. So we're talking about meaningful share of total, let's say, annual payroll, which goes to white collar workers. And you can look differently at AI. One way that I like to look at it is that it's a productivity booster for white collar intellectual labor, right? So a proportionate size impact either means that you need to touch every single white collar worker in the US and raise their productivity by, let's say, 20%. I'm just throwing numbers of the right order of magnitude, right? Not married to specific numbers. Or you need to touch still a significant share of total white collar workers and raise their productivity by like 100%, right, or 200%. And that's not happening yet. There are reasons to why it's not happening. One of the reasons is there's a gap, because from my perspective, the guys who are running the AI startups, they have the skills, because AI is still a skill-intensive thing to apply, right? But they lack understanding of the industry they're trying to apply it to. And on the other hand, you have the industry-specific with lack of skills. And this needs to be bridged by, one way or another. Because if we don't bridge it ourselves, it will bridge itself, but it will take a generation.
I think I really like your honesty about how slow big company can move in terms of AI. Though I feel like a lot of companies are building great AI tools within their company. And maybe we could talk about, I know that at media or media select, you guys are probably built a lot of insight AI tools that are very useful. What are something that you find interesting in terms of like internal tools that are leveraging AI?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think on the previous panel or the one before that, there was a question of build versus buy, and everyone said buy, which if you're a VC, yes, of course buy. But a lot of companies are building, and there's a few reasons for that. One is just the vision people have for what AI is going to do for their company. When you talk about productivity increases, large companies often think, oh, I can hire fewer workers, or my workers can spend less time on this task. A lot of AI startups are thinking, oh, I can give you the ability to do something totally different from what you were doing before. It's productivity, but it's not productivity for workers. It's productivity at the company level, or productivity at the innovation level. And so when a startup goes to a Fortune 500 company and says, hey, here's a great tool to make you more productive, the Fortune 500 company says, well, I actually don't have a way to fit that into my workflows today, into my employees' lives today. And so that's why I think you see a lot of large companies building interesting tools. So some of the tools we built this actually great tool internally, which you can put in natural language what a startup is doing, and it outputs what product within NVIDIA or what opportunity within NVIDIA could be relevant. Now, for most companies, that wouldn't be that novel, but does anyone here know how many products NVIDIA has? Who would guess it's more than 100? Okay, it's 350 products. So having the ability to go into a chatbot in real time and figure out how I can help a startup be more efficient, use some new tool they've never heard about, that's so valuable. And I don't know if there's any startup or any company off the shelf that's going to be able to do that for NVIDIA.
On the tools, we're guilty as well, right? We're an infrastructure company, so when we build tools, we do it to boost our own productivity, right? So we work a lot with people who can do our own research on more cost-effective ways to infer models, right? Or more cost-effective ways to train models, and all kinds of automation around that. But it's still far away, in my view, from what a Fortune 500 company needs, right? And to us, that's an inevitable problem because we're further away from those clients than the startups are trying to address them. So it's natural, right? As to why do people prefer to build versus buy, I think it comes back to the skill gap, right? Like, first of all, I think a lot of, and forget about the low-hanging fruits, right? Like, AI as a customer support chatbot is a given, table stakes, right? But beyond that, if you think of it from like a productivity standpoint, I have yet to see a startup which says, look, if I'm going to automate or raise the productivity of white-collar workers, let's start by figuring out what these white-collar workers do en masse, right? And trying to say, well, where are they employed? What do they do? And what type of impact I'm about to bring to them, right? Because it's nice to raise the productivity of the entire company through AI, but it's only possible if the specific industry which you're trying to address is bottlenecked by a very specific type of white-collar labor, right? So if a bank is bottlenecked by underwriters, you could do and boost the productivity of the entire bank by making the underwriters more productive. Otherwise, you'd be, if you're automating accounts receivables, there's just so many invoices. So if you raise the productivity of the workers, you need to cut the workforce, right? Which raises its own difficulties from bringing this impact home.
I think that's such a interesting topic about productivity, just because I think one of the things about leveraging AI is no one's calculating on the impact it's making. Well, obviously we can feel like, you draft an email using ChatGPT is a lot easier than you draft an email by yourself sometimes. But I wonder, how do you measure it at a scale, at a big company? How do you measure how much impact AI have been producing at your daily work?
I feel like you should start giving your consulting experience because managing outputs is probably a big part of that.
Well, I would say that there's like an easy answer and a difficult answer, right? I would start with an easy answer. If we stay within the white collar labor thing, right? The impact is literally how many people have you touched with AI so that they changed something in their lives. They started composing emails differently. They started, I don't know, doing something differently, right? So what's the absolute number of people your solution touches? And if the answer is 2, let's say you automated marketing, copywriting, and whatnot, that's great, but that's not up to scale to what the entire sector should aim to accomplish. Then you could go to a second level of effects, right? And try to say, okay, have I saved money? Have I made the company make more money, and so on and so forth. That requires a bit more sophisticated analysis and going into the specifics, right? But I would say that as a first proxy, trying to figure out how many people have changed something in their life, started doing something differently because of your decision is a good measure, your solution is a good measure of the impact you have on the grand scale.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in addition to that, everything does need to come back to dollars. Like productivity as an economic term means, what is it, widgets per person or something like that. Yeah, I was an econ major before I dropped out. But if a startup comes to you and they say, oh, look how many startups we're servicing, look how many companies we're servicing, that's great, but does that lead to retention? Does that lead to long-term impact? So, a lot of Fortune 500 companies may try out a product, they may try working with a startup, but when it comes to renew the contract, they are going to be looking at widgets per person. They're going to be looking at dollars per person. They're going to be looking at cost save or new opportunities enabled. So I think it has to be looked at with real tangible metrics and not just lofty ideas and innovation and excitement.
I wonder. I think we're back. Okay. So I wonder, when you guys are working on the big companies and then leveraging a lot of different AI tools, since a lot of the listeners are actually startup founders, what are some advice that you have for them to build a enterprise-grade product that could eventually launch or used by a Fortune 500 company?
That's a good question. I think a lot of founders have heard that the biggest impediment to becoming a customer or a Fortune 500 company becoming a customer is security. And I think that is, table stakes, compliance, security, having a tool that the company can have faith in. I think that's table stakes. But I do think showing real impact and understanding of the problem is important. And then I think the last thing that makes a real difference that a lot of startups don't think about is how does this integrate into the actual workflows? Are you trying to pitch another Salesforce where you have to integrate for a year and a half, or you have to start from scratch? Or is this something that can make a difference in your employees' lives tomorrow, or in your workflow or costs tomorrow? I think showing that trajectory, showing how long it takes to win, not that it needs to be a quick win, but you need to have that on the horizon.
I would suggest them to challenge the conventional software as a service model, which has been dominant in the industry in the recent years, right? Because if you think about the skill gap, and to me, AI is a hammer, right? And people don't need a hammer. They need the outcome of the hammer, right? The problem is people can't use the hammer and you don't understand what they do. So can you act, and the impact needs to be at scale, which means that you need to be able to make an impact on an average Joe doing an average job, right? So how do you do that? can you do that with a product which people should, with a good onboarding flow, which teaches people sort of themselves how to use it? Chances are that's not the case, because probably to start this movement, you actually need to provide plumbing services of sorts with a hammer, which means, well, let me give you a specific example, right? I'm very excited about code generation, and I think that's one of the areas where AI is making more of an impact, specifically because people who do AI understand this industry, the tech industry, very well, which is why the impact there is faster than in a lot of the other things, right? But tech is like a percentage, a meaningful percentage, but not the entire white-collar workforce. So you need to go there and actually understand what they do. Let me give you a specific example, right? Like, let's say, even adjacent to tech, let's say you were to come to a bank or an insurance company or to any business which is older than 20 years and say, look, you probably have legacy code for which the developer has retired, died, which is COBOL on a mainframe and whatnot, right? Would you like me to help you get rid of it with the help of an engineer? Because it will not be fully automated, right? So you need to send in a person who needs to understand what the code does. He needs to understand what he's transforming it to. He needs to understand the entire context around it, how is it being deployed, blah, 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 to actually do a good job. And that's the same thing that you need to do if you want to make impact on a grand scale in any other industry. You need to really well understand the specifics, which leads also to a question, who captures the value, right? Because if the end product is sort of, you take a piece of the organization with its processes, technologies, and whatnot, and change it, basically replace it with a different piece of organization with a different composition of people, tools, and technology, right? And that creates value. Who's going to capture the value? Is the value going to be in infrastructure, in large language model, or in services? And chances are, because that it will be in services, because that's where we're bottlenecked today.
I'll just add to this. Andre and I were speaking when we were preparing for the panel about sort of the language difference and how when you're in San Francisco, you see a Waymo driving by, you see a billboard for Nebius, you see everyone's on ChatGPT on their phone. You probably have a Gen Zer who's like, what is Google? I only use ChatGPT. That's not what normal interactions are like in corporate America every day. So there needs to be this understanding of like not just what infrastructure level, but what skill level, what conversation level are you meeting these companies at? If they're not using ChatGPT every day, then you offering them a ChatGPT adjacent solution doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean anything. And so I think getting in there and understanding the customer and their workflows and their architecture is really important before you offer the solution off the bat.
Yeah, and if you kind of build on this point a bit further, you'd need to specialize because you won't be able to understand all the industries, right? To me, which means I'm not a big believer in horizontal products which are, everything, something for everyone, right? And second, I would advise startup founders to actually be close to their customers. So if your customer is not in tech, why are you building it in the Silicon Valley? Why are you not building it in New York if your customer is in finance, right? Why aren't you building it in, I don't know, Chicago if your customers are there, right? Basically, and another point is, how do you actually get the first couple of customers? Because you won't have proven impact. The enterprise procurement cycle is a nightmare, but having an actual customer who gives you actual feedback and you can, prove who you can use to prove that your thing works is a challenge. But if you do that, I think you'll be able to turn it into a snowball, which will make a meaningful impact, but on a relatively specific industry.
I think that's such a interesting and important topic to talk about, how AI is actually implemented in the Fortune 500 companies. And then I really like the point that you made about being mainstream, because I feel like living in Silicon Valley, we live in a bubble that it feels like day to day, I could not live without all these ChatGPT, Cloud, and Perplexity. But when you move to a different country, actually today we have audience from Korea, flew in for the conference, and we have people from DC, from New York. So maybe AI is not as mainstream as we think. So I guess like one other thing is like, how do you make AI mainstream?
Yeah, how do you make AI mainstream? And I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, it is mainstream today, and definitely not the case. You mentioned having an audience member from Korea, and we've chatted a bit about this. AI is becoming somewhat localized. Different countries have different approaches to AI, whether that's from their governments investing in different solutions, or whether it's like a solution that fits their language or that fits their culture and work style. So I think there isn't one mainstream. There isn't one culture. There's going to be more specific sort of mainstreams. But I think you need to meet people where they're at. You need to verticalize for a certain extent if a company is only going to understand the vertical that they're in. Or you need to meet people with the products that resonate with them. You're not going to replace Instagram with a AI-generated Facebook, you know? Because people like the visual interaction. They've become used to the swipe motion. There's all of these different things in our culture that mean that it's not just about giving the tools and being there. It's about meeting people where they're at, giving them a product they want to interact with, and making it sort of even more natural language than a natural language model.
And you're okay with me messaging?
I couldn't agree more. I would actually suggest a test. Give whatever you're building to your mom. Can she use it? I was surprised, for instance, that when I first bought a smartphone to my wife's grandmother, she was 85 or 90, right? She had no issues using it. She was fluent in a day. That's where we're aiming with AI. An 80-year-old grandma should be able to use it pretty quickly and pretty productively.
I love that. On that note, instead of doing the mom test, do the grandma test for anything AI product that you're building. Audience, that's the main takeaway here. Thank you so much for joining this panel for the Fortune 500 perspective. You guys provided amazing perspectives, since every other panels are startups, especially. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.